Azure Cosmos
Entity Framework, Power Tools,
Technology Suite.
Countdown commencing. T-minus 2 minutes.
Jeremy Lickness.
Shay Rojansky.
Grace Lanson.
Arthur Vickers.
.NET Data. T-minus 1 minute. Thirty seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We are go for .NET Data Community Standup.
We're here. We're go. Just about. This has been a hot off the press kind of thing. We didn't have a show until about 10 minutes ago. Nothing was showing up on StreamYard. So anyway, we've made it. Shay apparently has been what's the word, rushing to put stuff together at the last minute. It's like true like conference talk time where you're doing your slides in the hotel room and you're supposed to be on stage. So so we're going to talk about aggregate functions today, and not something I know that much about, but I'm hoping to learn a lot from Shay on that. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. Let's do quick state of the unicorn first. So here we go, state of the unicorn. So really, we've been locking down everything that we're going to ship in EF7. We're kind of locking it down for RC1. That's our feature complete, if you like. Doesn't mean we won't be making tweaks and fixing bugs after that, but that's when all the major features are supposed to be in, and they are. But you don't want to get RC1, you want to get the daily builds, because RC1 isn't even released yet, and even when it will be released, we'll have done like several weeks more work on it, and so everything in the daily builds will be better. So back to that in a minute. But what's in RC1? JSON columns, yay! Mauricie's been working like a champ on this, and JSON column support's in there. I've been working on a doc for it for what's new, and it's looking really cool. Bulk updates. So this is, we're now calling this execute update and execute delete, because you don't have to use it for bulk, but that's still one of its main things. That's in there too. We've got, for the old school among you, we've got stored procedure mapping for insert, update, and delete, which I've also been playing with, and it has not convinced me to do anything with stored procedures, but it's there if you like it. We have the T4 templates that we've talked about before on the show. Bryce has got that fully merged in now, so that's all there, ready to go, ready to play with in the daily builds. We also have public model building conventions that I've been using today, and that's really cool. That lets you plug in as an application developer to the way we use conventions to discover properties, to set up cascade deletes, to determine, all of this stuff about the model, and you can now change them. And I've got several examples of those for the what's new stuff. And we'll probably do something on this show at some point because I think it'd be a good thing to talk about as well. There's so many different things you can do with that. And then plus, of course, all the other EF7 stuff that we've already shipped and talked about in previous previews. So you've got the TPC mapping, you've got the unidirectional many-to-many relationships, and all the other stuff. So start using the daily builds now. Go, Shay.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. I'd like to say that as well. So, for example, I worked on the sort procedure stuff, and it was ready for RC1. But when Arthur started playing around with it to write our What's New docs, he discovered some pretty fundamental bugs, which I'm now working on fixing. So, in general, it's really, really a good idea to use the daily builds where the fixes are there. If you're going to just be waiting for RC1, you'll be weeks behind, and there's a lot of action happening right now. Everybody's like heads down working on the bugs and everything. So, really, just use the daily builds. They're not less stable than RC1 in any way. They're just as stable. They're great. They're just better. So that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So following on from what Shay says, the daily builds, it's not like we have this thing where the RC1 builds or the preview builds or whatever are fundamentally anything different from the daily builds. It's really just a point in time. Right. We're taking RC1 now, and
same
then
tests,
build as it is.
Same validation.
Occasionally, we might put something in RC1 after we've branched through, say, we really want to ship that in RC1. But that's always in the daily build as well, right? Like Shay says, it runs all those 100,000 tests and everything, so it's the same. It's the same stuff. I mean, I never use anything else other than the daily builds, except when I'm testing something that one of our users, one of you guys, has sent and said, "Oh, this doesn't work on this," then I might. But other than that, it's daily builds all the time, and we call them daily builds, but they actually might be their rolling builds, really. So you might even get multiple new ones a day. So basically, as soon as something merges into our main branch for EF7. We start a build. When that build goes, it publishes it to the feed, and hot off the press, usually in an hour or two, you get it. And they're super easy to use. You don't need to install the daily builds of .NET 7. In fact, you can still use .NET 6 on this. EF7 is targeting .NET 6, so you don't have to move off an LTS platform in order to use EF7, which itself is not LTS, but it's just NuGet packages. So there's a lot of people who are like, I want to be on the LTS platform, but I'm happy to use newer packages. So you can do that. You don't need to use the daily builds or the new ASP.NET Core 7 or anything like that. You can use ASP.NET Core 6 with EF7 as well. That should all work. And it's super easy. So if you've got a console application, like on here, right? So you've got a console application, you've got your solution folder, stick a file in there called nuget.config, and there's going to be a link to this on our show links. And also, if you go to the GitHub repo for EF, so .NET EF Core, on the first page there's a link that says daily builds, and it lays it out in there. But basically, you put a NuGet config there next to your solution, and in that config file, it's got a couple of lines. It's got the package source for NuGet, which is the normal thing, and before that, you have another line. And I know it's hard to read that on the screen here, but like I say, this line that you need to put in there is on the GitHub page. It's super easy. That's all you need to do. Now, when you go use NuGet in the solution, you'll find the daily builds. So give that a try. Okay, now we're going to do something a little different, and the guys don't know I'm going to do this, so we'll see how that goes.
Oh boy,
what's going on here?
Yeah. Oh no.
Okay, Jeremy's
but the cat's about to get let out of the bag.
Yes.
No,
okay,
we don't want to show the director sync.
Yeah. No, that's what we want to show, right? So hang on, let me get my screen back here so I
So
can
you
see
do know
guys.
we're live, like on.
Yeah,
like,
so
the world is
we have
watching.
to. We actually have to. We can't go run over as long as always, Jeremy and I, because we have to go and do a director's sync with our bigwigs. And so I thought, since we're all friends here, right, and no one's going to spill the beans on anything, I'll let you have a sneak peek to what we're going to show them. So let's. I did have to redact a few things here, so we won't show you any of that. We won't show you any of that. But here, this is what I really wanted to show. This is what we're saying to the directors today. It looks like when I moved it over to my online things, it's messed up the PowerPoint a little bit. But anyway, so complete for EF Core 7. So these are all the things that we're shipping. JSON columns. These are top voted features, by the way. We've got safe changes performance on Shai's blog. It said 74% on one of those. So I'm telling directors it's up to 74% faster. We can do value generation with converters, which DDD people wanted to do, have wanted for a long time. We've got all the interceptor stuff that we talked about. We've got TPC that we talked about, stored procs. All of these things are also EF6 parity. So we were doing these partly to really reduce the feature gap between EF6, the old legacy EF6, and EF Core 7, and we've really done that. But a lot of this stuff is really cool stuff in of itself anyway. So it's not like we're only doing these for the parity. Like TPC is a good mapping thing. Public model building conventions are really useful. T4 templates, awesome, right? Raw queries for primitive types. We had to cut raw queries for arbitrary types, so we didn't do that, but we will do that at some point. With great experience back for WinForms data binding. There's actually on our docs page now, we have a walkthrough that uses WinForms, and it's awesome. I love WinForms. It's so easy. Unidirectional many-to-many. We have an attribute now for configuring composite keys. Also, Shay has worked on stuff in the system data stuff, so this is not EF, so we now have distributed transaction support on Windows, and the DB data source that we talked about in one of these sessions a few weeks ago. We're still working on trimming. Shay's still working on making trimming better. We also have some further plans to make tech empowered data updates better. We're Woodstar,
Not
which
just
is
data updates, just in general.
okay. Tech Empower in general is going to be even faster.
Yes.
Woodstar, which is a thing Smith has done a lot of work on. There's not much publicly visible right now, but this is making a super fast SQL client driver for SQL Server and Azure SQL. Entity splitting, we're just finishing touches off that. I don't know that anybody actually uses entity splitting, so it's interesting. If you do, tell us what you're using it for. It'll be
you
good.
should say what it is. I don't think people actually know what it is.
Yeah, but then I have to get it right? So
yeah.
Table splitting is the case where you have one table, and you end up mapping that to multiple entity types. So, for example, a common case of this is owned entity types, where there's 3 entity types. You have a customer, you have contact details, you have address, and then they all go into the one table. So that table is split to 3 entity types. Entity splitting is the other way around. So you have one entity type, so customer, for example, but then some of it goes to one table, and then maybe you want to store the customer's image or something in a different table for whatever reason. So then even though that's in the customer entity type, it goes to another table. So that's entity splitting. Table splitting is much more common than entity splitting. Okay, and then fully transparent here, we did have to cut quite a lot of stuff. I know a lot of people were upset, including myself, that we cut the value objects work. We had a bunch of Cosmos stuff that we wanted to do, a bunch of improvements to migrations, system link expressions. We've really wanted to move that forward, but that hasn't gone anywhere. We were going to do some stuff for open telemetry on ADO.NET, and there were some new link operators we wanted to translate. So yeah, we definitely overbooked ourselves. This is something we're taking into our retrospectives and for the new planning and everything. But I do want to say, I think the team has done an awesome job. Everybody on the team has done an awesome job in doing this stuff. Can we use T4 template generate upsert support? Not really. Those are 2 different things. Upsert is definitely high on our list. We'll see when we do EF8 planning where it falls out. Okay, and then A few things here. So on our daily burn downs, so we've actually closed, this was of Monday morning, 268 fixed issues in EF7. So go team for that. People are loving stuff, excited for bulk updates. Wow, this is awesome about the events and interceptors. ASP.NET Core and EFTOR teams never cease to amaze me. This was about the safe changes improvements. And even the stuff that we think isn't very cool. So this is the thing about distributed transaction support. That got 150 likes and a bunch of impressions on Twitter. So pretty good there. Eric's still getting, and other people are getting improvements out of the stuff we did in previous releases. Franz Bohmer has a set of benchmarks, and Eric submitted an improvement that got a change that got 60% improvement on there. And then, as I already alluded to, we now have over 100,000 tests running on every commit. So every daily build, it's past these 100,000 plus tests, and people really like that as well. I think it shows that we're doing the right things in terms of engineering and everything. So that's what we're going to tell the directors, but you've now had a sneak peek, so don't tell anyone. And everything else is redacted, so we'll stop there. Over to you, Shay. Let's talk about aggregate functions.
Okay, so yeah, a few quick words of introduction. So the work you're about to see, I participated in it mainly on the design side of things and investigating what databases are capable of, and of course doing the Postgres work as I usually do. But almost all of the actual, the actual work and the architecture was done by Smit Patel, which is another engineer on the team. So as usual, I'm going to be talking about stuff that I didn't do, which other people deserve the credit for. So it's really important to say Smit did an awesome job. I'm super happy that this feature came in. What you're about to see, by the way, is an example of something that we didn't necessarily plan for. That's something that happens in planning. It's something that kind of just got in, and I think it's nice that we also have that flexibility. And I think it's a very, very cool feature. And I think, yeah, I'm super happy that it happened. Yeah, and what you're about to see is also available starting from, I think, even preview 7. So this has already been merged a while ago. Yeah, that's about it. So let's go and talk about code right away. I don't want to be, blabbering about too much. So basically, aggregate functions. So I think everybody knows aggregate functions, but nobody kind of thinks about them like on the theory of everything, right? So aggregate functions, it's a very simple thing. If you've ever used max or count or min or average or sum, these are the 5 basic kind of functions, and you've used an aggregate functions. So how does it actually work? Let me just get my setup here. Right. So what I have here is
go a bit bigger.
Really? Okay. Like
maybe
this?
Go into, you're not in
right,
presentation mode.
I always forget that stuff.
Let's get some high contrast going on too. The gray on gray.
Presentation mode.
Oh,
and
we lost you.
Yeah, that's what happens. No, it's like a known thing. It happens every single time you switch from. So let's share again. Screen this, screen that, and I think we're better now, right?
Yes.
Yes. Are we not better? We're much better. Okay. So what you see here is a very, very simple kind of, code sample. We just have a blogs kind of thing. It has some properties. I've seeded some data so that we can play around with it. You'll see soon why I've seeded this particular data, but I just want to jump right in. So as I said, aggregate functions, you've all used them. It's not particularly interesting. For example, EF allows you to do this. So I'm going to go to the blogs and I'm just going to do, let's go async. I always love to do things with async because it's the one true way. Yes. So what this does here is it gets me, it basically does an aggregate function called max over the blogs, or specifically over the views column of the blogs. So I'm showing something very basic everybody should be more or less familiar with if you know just a little bit of SQL, but I'm setting the ground because it's going to get a little bit more interesting soon. Let's set everything up. So yeah, that query, which you see here, this thing right here, what you see here is this very, very simple query where what we're projecting out is this function. And here you see the actual result of it, 20. Why 20? Because we've seeded and we have views 8, 10, and 20. So the blog with the most views is this one, and that's what we got out. That's the number. Now, this looks like a function, right? It looks like just a normal function in SQL. You guys know functions. There's many functions in SQL. And it looks the same way, right? It looks like there's a name of a function, and then there's parentheses, and inside there's a thing. But in fact, this is something completely different from the functions you're aware of. B.views here doesn't represent represent a single value. Usually functions which you use represent a single value, right? And they're executed for each row. So if, for example, instead of max here, I put something, I don't know, Arthur, give me some function here, some arbitrary function.
Concat. Or no.
Concat.
Yeah.
Why not? Or square root. Maybe there's a function called square root. I don't even know, but let's say there's a function called square root. If I had square root here or something like that, then that function would actually be evaluated for every single row in blocks, right? Every row in blocks would get their views square rooted. And then what we'd get back is a list of values, right? One for each block. In this case, we have 3 blocks, so we'd get back 3 values. Each row would be the square root. But what we do here is something completely different. Max accepts basically the entire column. It works on columns. That's the right way to think about aggregate functions in general. So it accepts the entire views column, which is in this case 3 values on this table, and it reduces it to a single value, right? In this case, the max function specifically will go through all those values, and it will select the one or return the one that is, the maximum one. And what we have here is 20. So radically different idea. It's particularly weird for people coming from a normal programming language like in C#. There's no such thing as an aggregate function per se, right? You do have functions operating over enumerables. That would be kind of like the analog of an aggregate function. A little bit maybe, but you don't have like a different concept of a function that is an aggregate function, unlike in SQL or in relational databases where that's a completely separate concept. It's like a very, very different thing. I'm going to show another aggregate function here. So let's say I want to do count. So count is slightly different. With count, I don't have a selector. So it's important. With max async, I have to have a selector. If I didn't put a selector, then we wouldn't know what we want to calculate the max over, right? We just have the blocks, but we don't know which column over the blocks we want to, do our calculation, which is why we absolutely have to have a selector. With count, things are different. I have an await, so I also need to have an async. Count simply counts the rows, so it doesn't actually need a selector. That's an important thing. You can put a predicate here, by the way, so you can do b.views is bigger than 5. That's basically a where clause, what you see here. It's a very different, although it's a lambda, just like in the max case, it's very, very different, right? This is a selector. It tells us which column of blocks we want to, calculate over.
Can I put a predicate on the max too?
You can put a where here.
A where clause in here. So
right.
What you're saying is when I put a predicate in the count, that's just a sugar
Exactly.
for logs, where, views, count.
Yeah, this is very uninteresting, right? And in fact, you can do this. Let's do it like as a small thing. So this has nothing to do with EF or databases, what we're discussing, but I'll show it anyway.
Well,
so if I do,
it has to do with EF and databases. It doesn't have to do with aggregates specifically.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, if I did this with the sync API, by the way, just for a second, then you see that this thing has this green squiggly thing, and what it says is replace this with a single call to count. Okay, so there's this hint here that this thing can be simplified, and I'm going to do that, quick fix, and we just get the count like this, which shows you that this lambda here is simply a predicate like a where clause, right? Unfortunately, by the way, if I switch to async, this is, I'm just rambling about because you've made me start. Here we don't get that tooltip quick fix thing because count async is our thing. It's our function, and it's not part of the standard thing.
If the IDE people are listening, this would be awesome to have, by the way. Also, the other thing that I've noticed, which is similar to this, and we're kind of getting off topic here, but when I do toList, for example, or when I do save changes, for example, it will automatically tell me, oh, there's an async version of do you want to change to that. But when I do toList, it won't tell me there's an automatic change to I want to use toList async because it's not there next to it, I assume. It's in the extension.
It's an extension.
Exactly. And everything. But it'd be great if you could make it do that. I would love that. Anyway. Moving on.
Sure, no problem. So again, back to talking about count. So if I do count, I'm just going to run this again. Very basic stuff just to get us started. Right. So what we have here now is this select star. This star, by the way, there's other things. I could talk about this more, but we do want to get ahead. So there's some interesting things going on. But this is basically another aggregate function. The special thing here is that this is the only aggregate function I'm aware of in existence which operates on rows. Okay, that's kind of an interesting thing with count. All other aggregate functions work not on rows, but rather on columns, or rather on some selection over the rows, right? Some column over the rows, like you saw with max. But count is very, very special. Okay, and now
So
with this,
if you did, would you so any in link? Would you that's an aggregate function, right? Really, or is it not?
Conceptually it is, right? Because any takes a lot of things and it returns a bool.
But
right?
it just translates into account when we do
how
it?
we translate it is a good question. It depends on the context. Sometimes it's going to be a
Okay.
subquery. You're right. Like the question is very right, but here, link and SQL diverge, and we have to do the translation, right? Unfortunately. So, but conceptually, what you said is entirely correct. So anything that gets basically an IEnumerable and returns a scalar in C# could be said to be an aggregate function, and conceptually that's completely true. Okay, we can say this. And at this point, I'm going to stop for 1 second, and I'm going to give a riddle to our crowd, and I'm not going to answer it until the end of this show. So I want you to think about it. Don't think about it too much. Listen to what I'm saying, because that's more important. But still think about it a little bit, like in the back of your mind. So you're seeing this SQL, right? We have two queries. We've got max and count here. The question is, how would you do this if you wanted to get both of them out in the same query? It's a surprisingly difficult thing. It's not very, so here we have max and we have count. And again, what I'm saying is I want you guys to come up with some solution to get both of those out in one single query, which also would mean one round trip, right? I'm a perf guy, so it would mean like, let's do this more in a more, performant way and so on.
Shay said round trip, take a drink.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody. That's probably the last time I'm going to do this here, by the way. There's not going to be another one. Okay, so what we've seen here, so keep this question in mind. We're going to come back to it because it's actually a little bit relevant later. So now what you're seeing here is us using an aggregate function. We call this in the EF team at the top level, right? So at the top level, we're not inside a where class. We're not inside an order by. We're not inside anything. Whoops. We're at the very, very top level. We're using an aggregate function. The alternative here is if we use it in after a group by, excuse me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just reminding you guys, we've got our blogs, and each blog has a category. So in this session, we're going to group by the category a lot. It's just an artificial thing. We're going to group by just to be able to show you guys what we're doing. So we're going to do this. This is just link, right? This is supposed to be pretty easy. Now, with EF Core, when you group by, you guys are probably aware, in order to translate this construct to SQL, we need to now select and use an aggregate function to reduce it back to a scalar. That's just how SQL works. You can't just group by and project it out of the database because that doesn't translate to SQL, but you can select it out. So what we're going to do here is we're going to project out from the group. These tooltips are sometimes super annoying, right? So what we want to project out is, let's get out the blog ID. Sorry, we're looking at categories, right? So I'm going to get out the category, if I can spell correctly, right? So the key is the category ID. And then at this point, I'm going to do, let's go with the max. So g.max, right? And 1 second. Here we still need to use the selector, of course. Exactly like before. There's no difference with what we did before. So if you look at this, we now have a query. Of course, we haven't yet actually executed it. So let's execute it. For each category in those categories, this actually evaluates the thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to just print it out. This is a little bit of writing, but it's going to be over soon, and we're going to run it. So we're going to print out the category, and then we're going to print out the maximum, the maximum views value. So I'm going to run this now. I'm showing the other context in which we can use aggregate functions now. Okay, so what you see here is something very different from before. Before we simply had a max, but now we also have a group by. So what happens now is instead of having just a single thing for the entire table, that's what we did before. Now we first do a group by, and the max value that we get here is for each group. Our grouping is over the category. So what we see here is that the cooking category has the max of 20, and the IT category has the max of 10. I'm going to go down again to remind you guys what our C data actually looks like. So we've got 2 IT blogs, and 10 is in fact the maximum views. So this is working as expected. The important thing here is that there's no 2 blogs in our, we've reduced it. Basically, we've reduced those 2 rows into a single row, which is the grouping or the department. Is everything, do you think everything is clear here, Arthur? Anything to add to that?
So Well, I do want to say that please ask your questions in chat, even if we don't get to them right away. I'm marking questions and we'll come back to them and ask them at the end if they're kind of not related directly to what we're talking about, or when we get to a good stopping point otherwise.
Sure.
But I do have a kind of a question on that. What would happen if you tried to have a group that had nothing in it? Would it just not show up in the results? Or like, let's say there were no blogs or category, there was nothing in the cooking category.
Then that means that there's no row
There's no
with
group
cooking,
for it.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's literally no row there that has cooking in its the value cooking doesn't actually exist in the database, right? So
Yeah.
we wouldn't have a group ever.
So
It
there
would
wouldn't
be
be
impossible
a group
to get.
returned.
Yeah, exactly. Just like there's right now no group for, I don't know, home design, right? I haven't seeded it, so we're not seeing it basically because it's
So-
not there.
What would happen though if you did your simple example over a where you were just saying the number of views, but there wasn't any rows in the data?
You mean
So
you
what
mean
would
this?
be what's the max of the empty set is what I'm asking.
You know what? Why ask? Let's just try it out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out this seeding code, and as you can see, my demo always drops and creates the database, so we can just run it and see what happens. What do you think will happen?
I think it will throw.
You are correct. Always better to. So the thing is,
But-
it's
But the
pretty simple.
interesting thing is, I don't think SQL Server throws, right?
That's a very good point, Arthur. So yeah, okay. I didn't plan to go into this, but you're very, very right. So which one do you think throws, by the way? Because we have max here, we've got count, we've got the group by. What do we think?
I think max throws.
I agree. I tend to agree. Now,
What is the answer to the max of nothing?
that's right. That's exactly right. So what we do here with Max is we basically follow the link to objects, the normal link behavior, right? So if you use link, forget about EF core, just go home, use C# and use link, and you use Max. Max absolutely has to have at least one thing in the sequence in its input. Otherwise, there's no possible reasonable response it could give you. So it throws. That's how Max is, right? Some people might think, yeah, just give me a 0 or something like that. But that programming doesn't work that way, right? You can do a Max over a nullable value, by the way. If you do Max over an int question mark, that will not throw, and that will or will it? I'm actually not even sure.
If there's no results.
If there's no result, yeah, you're right.
Yes.
It will still throw. Yeah, you're right. See, I'm not even sure about these corner cases. You're
Now,
very
if there
right.
are results, but they're all null, I believe then it should return null. Samir is lurking in the background. He maybe will tell us in
He's the
our
expert.
private chat whether I'm getting this right or not. But,
Absolutely.
yes.
But the nice thing you added, the nice little detail is that when we do Max, if I remember correctly, you're right, and the database doesn't throw. The database doesn't give an error if you do a Max. It actually returns null. Null in SQL has a different kind of concept. Null means unknown or unknown, basically.
Yes.
No answer possible, whatever you want to call it.
You've
right?
asked a paradoxical question.
Exactly.
So null is appropriate because I have no idea.
Basically, in many situations where C# throws, the database will return a null. Null is kind of like an exception, in fact, and that's why it's also very viral, right? If you include a null in any expression in SQL, then it will tend to turn everything in its path to null.
Yes.
Just like an exception kind of cancels the entire expression that it's in, right? So what EF core does is when you do a Max and it gets back a null from the database, it translates that into an exception, okay? So that we can mimic the link to objects behavior. And yes, null is 42, absolutely. 42 is also a value we hard code in the SQL Server provider, by the way, for something, but I won't go into that. It doesn't really matter.
I mean, the null, just to add in general, the null handling, like Shay is saying, that's one of the major impedance mismatches between most programming languages and SQL, right? And so that's where we end up with these interesting cases where, like, well, what should we do? SQL does this thing, but that's not idiomatic to what .NET expects, and so on. So it's always great when you're writing ORM to think about the nulls.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's lots of fun and games with that. Okay, there's one more thing before I go. All this is not new. Obviously, all this always worked. There's one thing I wanna, you guys to keep in mind. If I hover over this max async, then what you see here is that this max async is defined as an extension function over iQueryable. Okay, iQueryable is again this top level thing. So when we look at CTX blogs, which is a DB set, that is an iQueryable. Okay, that is a thing we can query from. It's an iQueryable. It is not just an IEnumerable. It's not a simple IEnumerable. It's something that we query against as opposed to just enumerate. Whereas if I go to this max, okay, this is not max async, but you're gonna have to trust me. Let me switch to sync just so that you're not suspicious of me, pulling a fast one. So this max is still over queryable, right? This is an extension method over queryable, whereas this max is something completely different. It's an extension method over IEnumerable. So we're actually looking at two different functions. When we are at the top level, like immediately over a DB set or composing directly over a DB set, that's an iQueryable operation. Whereas the moment we're inside another operator, another lambda like select in this case, we're in the projection, we're now in the IEnumerable world, which is a very, very different thing. We're no longer at the top level, and that's going to become a little bit important, moving on. Okay, so keep that kind of in mind, and also keep my riddle in mind. Again, how can I get back max and count in the same kind of thing in one
We had
fell
a couple of questions. Shall I
Sure.
answer?
Yeah, let's do that.
Select many.
Yeah, I mean, select many is an operator, but it's not necessarily related to group by or groupings or aggregates per se. There's
And
no
then-
in general. There's no. Sorry, Jeremy, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say, I think he was offering that as an answer to your riddle.
Oh, as an answer.
Yeah.
What I'd like to see is an actual code sample rather than just a predicate.
Ooh.
I know I'm being a bit. I mean, obviously, I'm going to use this as as like a jumping point for showing you guys something later. So I just want you to think about it. Maybe it's possible to do with select many. I'm not sure, but maybe it is.
And then, what? Just before we move on, several people have basically said cast it to a nullable. And Smith, I believe, if I read what Smith said in the chat, that should work, and it won't throw if you cast it to a nullable when you're doing the empty connections.
So then it will return a null value if it's like an empty sequence. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Smith will tell me if I got that wrong still, which is normal.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on.
Okay. Should more questions, or should I just move on?
Just move on now, I think.
Okay, let's move on. Fine. Okay, so what you've seen here is just an introduction, right? The thing is that up to EF7, the support for these aggregate functions, which I just demoed, was built-in hard-coded. So EF Core specifically, recognized and supported 5 functions. I hope I'm not leaving anything out. Again, max, min, average, sum, and count. If you had another aggregate function of any sort, and databases do support other functions, you actually could not call that thing, and that has been a limitation that's been lifted. So I'm gonna start with maybe the more boring one, just so I can work my way up. So one thing that was also supported in EF6, and that's important for us, it's another EF6 kind of parity thing, is that you can now do a standard deviation. Okay, so what you see here, I'm still using the same kind of grouping, the same code with select. There's still the category with the key. I'm even going to leave the max here just for fun for a second, but I'm going to add another property to this anonymous object we're projecting out. And now there's a new EF functions standard deviation population. Now, I don't know anything about statistics. I'm not smart enough to understand statistics. And there's even 2 types of standard deviation. There's population and sample. I understand even less what that means. I have some sort of like an intuitive understanding of standard deviation. It's probably wrong, but I can't tell you anything about it. All I know is that it's an aggregate function. And that's the part that, I'm concerned about being the guy in EF Core, right? So this is basically a thing that we're going to use to compute the standard deviation over an entire column in a group, right? Now, here's where it becomes interesting. You see that with max, we have max as an extension method over the group, right? Because max is a standard method. This is a standard extension over IEnumerable in .NET. So you can write it like this, and it looks very, very nice. However, for standard deviation, things are a little bit more tricky. We have this principle in EF Core that we never, ever add extension methods over IEnumerable or over basic types, right? We don't want you, so we could do something like this. This is like a kind of like a design question. We could have done something like this: standard deviation, and B views. We could have allowed you to express the standard deviation operation like this. However, if we did this, that would be just another extension method over IEnumerable, right? And you would be able to use this anywhere else in your program where you have an IEnumerable of int. And if you did do that, then that would throw immediately, right? Because this does not actually implement in C# standard deviation. I don't want to sit down and write the code for, the statistical code for standard deviation. And that's not the job of EF-core as an ORM. All we want is this function to be there so that you can specify it in queries so that it can be translated, right? This is why instead of doing extension methods over this kind of thing, what we do is we introduce it via EF functions. Again, this is not specific to aggregate functions. The other functions that you see, since EF-core 1, we've added our own functions which you can use in translations, and they don't work outside of queries, and they're always found on EF functions. That's like a very, very fundamental principle that we have in our design, right? So EF functions looks nice with normal functions. It looks a bit less nice with aggregate functions, unfortunately. I'm going to put this in a comment. So remember, what is the input to an aggregate function? It's basically a column or an IEnumerable over scalar values, which are going to be reduced, right, by the aggregate function, by the standard deviation. So what we do here is we give it as an, let's look at what it wants, because this is a little bit, you have to wrap your head around this. It looks fairly simple, right? Standard deviation gets an IEnumerable of int or any other numeric thing. You can see all the overloads. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take the group. G is the group, right? So again, the group is an IEnumerable of blogs. It's many, many blogs from our table, right? We still have to select the column out of that over which we want to compute the standard deviation, right? Which is why we are going to do g.select. And inside that select, we go back to B. That's why I call this B, because we're back to the blog. The name of that lambda variable kind of, expresses what this is. And from the blog, we select out the views, okay? I hope this isn't too cryptic for people. It looks a little bit more complicated than this thing, unfortunately, but we have no choice, okay? This is because, again, we could have gone with this kind of syntax, but that would have made it very, very easy it would show up in IntelliSense everywhere where you have an IEnumerable int, and we don't want that to happen. I'm just gonna run this for a second.
We spent hours, by the way, trying to figure out the best ways to do this, hours of discussion in the team, well, makes it easy to use, but doesn't make it like pit of failure in other places, all that kind of good stuff.
Exactly, and there's a last, like at the end of this, when we get back to my riddle answer, then we'll talk about that again, about that exact discussion which we had in the team. So now what you can see here is that we have the max, and then we have the std dev p. Right? So this is the translation for SQL Server for the standard deviation population function as opposed to sample. Again, no idea what the difference is, but if you want a standard deviation, you're going to have to figure that out and choose the correct function. I'm not going to help you there because I have no idea. So this is still fairly simple. It looks kind of not amazing because of this, because it's an EF functions thing, and here you have to feed it, the grouping with the select. So it looks kind of weird, but it is what it is, and it's fine. It works out. It makes sense. I think we're all happy with it. Just so that everybody's clear, I'm going to paste. There's 4, let's say, standard statistics functions which all databases support, which is why, by the way, standard deviation is. Oh, we did implement no. Okay. Anyway, you're going to find these in all databases, basically. I implemented this in Postgres as well, and so on. So you've got the population, you've got the sample, and you've got a thing called variance. Again, no idea. There's a population and a sample version. If I run this, then you can see I'm computing a lot of, aggregate values from those things in this same query, right? So there's max, standard deviation p, standard deviation, var p, and var variance, okay? Now, I'll just say, if you go to Postgres, I'm not going to do this now, but there's a whole page of extra advanced statistical functions. I was very, very excited about this, so I sat down and did all of them in a weekend. It was a lot of fun. So just so that you know, now the nice thing about this is that whenever a provider, a specific database supports some extra function that it doesn't exist on some other database, that's fine. A provider can add their own translations for aggregate functions, just like they could for normal functions up to now. So you can do whatever you want now in a database provider, which is extremely cool. And I hope.
So I do think I know the answer to the question. How do you choose between standard deviation population and standard deviation sample?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So what you do is you run them both, and then depending on what you're trying to prove with your statistics, you choose the one that gives you the best answer. Right. That's the way that works, isn't it?
That's a bit cynical, Arthur, I would say. Is that the right data-driven approach that we encourage here?
Oh, I don't know.
I
Anyway,
don't know either.
moving on.
Not,
Moving
not
on.
so sure. Exactly, yes. But I personally think statistics is boring, and I mean, either you're gonna need to compute standard deviation, or you don't care about what I just showed. So I'm gonna show something that's a bit closer to to people. So let's maybe put these in a comment. So the other function that is fairly standard across databases is a function that I think everybody here knows, and that's string join. So string join is a thing that you can use to, if you have like, an IEnumerable of stuff, you can join it together into a single string with delimiters inside. You've probably used this in LINQ. So you can now translate this into SQL, which is extremely cool, right? So what we're going to do here, this is starting to get a little bit weird, I think. Maybe I'll just copy paste. No, I'm gonna try my luck and actually do this. So I'm gonna use the normal string join method. Hopefully I'm gonna get this right. So string join is just this static method on string. You give it a delimiter, the thing to stick in between everything, and then I need to give it an enumerable, right? And it's going to reduce it to a single string. So once again, it's a classical aggregate function. It takes a lot of stuff, like a list of stuff, reduces it to a single string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the select here, and I'm going to take the name. So what we're doing is we're grouping by category. And for each category, we're going to pull out all of the names of the blocks for that category, and we're going to concatenate them together and pull them back to the client in one fell swoop. This is starting to be a pretty fancy operation, I think, right? So what I'm going to do also, now there's no longer a max here, so it's names, right? So I'm going to build this and run it. How am I doing for time? It's not so bad. Okay, so what you're going to see here is something a little bit complicated. So the function in question is called string add. This is a SQL Server function called string add that kind of corresponds to string join. And what you see here is this here is the delimiter. Everything is kind of upside down because things look a bit different. This here is the column that we want to perform the lookup over. Now, you see these two coalesces. That's another mismatch, exactly the kind of mismatch that Arthur was talking about, the thing with nulls and C# and so on. So the problem with string ag is if you give it a null, then it's going to just filter it out. That's the SQL behavior for string ag. By the way, most aggregate functions filter out nulls. That's almost a universal kind of behavior. However, on the C# side, if you give like an array of strings and one of them has a null, it does not filter it out. Instead, you will just get two commas. You'll get the delimiter, and there's going to be a blank in between. So in order to do the translation correctly, we need to make things correspond. So what we do is we insert a coalesce inside so that all the nulls become an empty string. And that makes the translation return the same result that it would have returned had I just run this in C#, right? Does that make sense for everybody? Yeah, I know. Julie says she'll never be writing SQL like that. Me neither. I completely agree. By the way, I'm going to just for fun, I'm going to make this a little bit better. Of course, we put this coalesce because we know that name is nullable. We only need that coalesce because name was nullable in the first place, right? But if I went down here to name and put required on it, then it's no longer nullable, right? So we
you're
don't
not
really
using nullable reference types here.
No, I'm not. That's actually, yeah, I'm not. You're right. Shame on me. Absolutely, shame on me. You're right. And magically, that coalesce is now gone, and that's kind of a cool thing. Why you've informed EF Core in the model that this thing cannot contain null, and therefore we can optimize your SQL and omit that thing. But I'm gonna go back to it. The other coalesce that we have here, because we had another one, is outside of string aggregate, itself, and that's because let's see if I remember this one. If there's nothing there, if the table was empty, if the group was there's nothing there, then I think the string ag will return a null from the database. But what we want is an empty string because that's how string join works. So the mismatch happens twice in one single function call, which is kind of entertaining, I think. So we need to introduce that coalesce. We do this for you. You don't have to think about it. We guarantee that it's going to be the same. What I do have to do is uncomment my seeding data so that we get some meaningful results out of this thing. So I'm going to run this again. Right. So this is the cool thing, is to actually see the results. So we've got the category name here, and we've got, let's look at IT, and then we've got the results of that string join. It works as if you ran it in C#. I find this super cool.
Two questions on this.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, so what is the advantage of doing that on the server as opposed to bringing back and creating the string on the client?
So if you want to get this, if you want to write this without an aggregate function like this, you're going to have to actually download all those blogs in some way, right?
Well, why can't you? You could select out the names, right, and download just the names.
You could select out the names, but then you
And
still
then-
so remember, you need the names, and you need also the category for each name, right? Because you need to know in which string to concatenate it, right?
But in the group by where you do a string join there, could you not just get the names for that right there, like for that
You
group?
mean like right
Instead of doing the string join
without the
just do
string join?
keys? Yes.
Just a primitive array.
So
Like names.
like
G
G dot select.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think that should definitely work, right? So
And is there advantage of doing it on
for this
server?
particular, for this specific case, I'm guessing there's no advantage. In others, yeah, this is not maybe the example where you can actually, you'll see where this goes. And you're getting the arrays. By the way, you're seeing that the query here is going to be a little bit more complicated, and there might be a perf disadvantage here. I haven't actually looked at it, so we're actually doing a join here. There's a group by and a join. Whereas this is not something that we need to do. Let's compare the SQL. So this is like live. I haven't actually explored any of this. It's just Arthur and me kind of talking about stuff. This actually produces SQL, which might be more efficient, right? Because there's no extra join there. Although aggregate functions also have their price; they're not free. So I don't have an answer to what you're saying, but this more closely corresponds. Let's say.
But it's another tool in your toolbox, right?
It's another tool, exactly. It's another tool in your toolbox.
Good question just came up in chat though. How are the names ordered?
I love it. I love questions that bring me directly to my next point. So
well, in that case, I have another question before we move to your next point.
Yes.
Which is, are there not options to string join? Like, I'm pretty sure you can. There's a string you can pass options. Do we translate those?
So what I know is that there's the start index and the count, right? You can tell it where to start. Is that all there is? I think so.
Maybe it's the
you're thinking
split
about
that has options.
Yeah. I think split has options. I think join is not that exciting. And the start index and the count. I mean, no,
I just wondered if there was an option on it where you could say like
there is not
or something. Okay,
there is not as far as I know.
So moving on then.
Right.
The ordering question.
Exactly. Just before the ordering, I do have one remark, and I'd like people to understand this. This is pretty cool. So we're used to thinking about aggregate functions as reducing functions. So they take a lot of values and they do some sort of mathematical calculation on them and reduce them to a single thing. Sum is like a very, very classical example. You take 10 numbers and now you have one number coming out. It's a lossy conversion from a lot of data into one piece of data. That's usually what we think about when we think about aggregate functions. This is not the case here. What we've done here, we've not lost any of the data whatsoever. We've combined it into a single string. You can think of it as if we've reshaped the data from a set of column of scalars into something else which still kind of represents them. So it's a different kind of aggregate function conceptually speaking, and that's a theme that we're going to explore in a bit. That's kind of very cool, the stuff that you can do with this. Okay, but before that, let's go and do stuff that's very, very practical. So what about the ordering? So if you just do this, as you probably know, SQL does not ever guarantee any ordering that's not explicitly defined by you, right? So if I look at this, if I ran this in link to objects, then there would be some order based on the actual order of as things come out in this expression. But in SQL,
however they came out from the enumerable, right?
Exactly. So I don't know what group by does exactly and how it works, and I don't want to depend. I don't want to assume anything. So I would say that's fairly non-deterministic, even in the link to objects kind of case, right? We look at this, we don't know. But in SQL, it's even more clear that it's non-deterministic because that's how databases work. That's how relational databases work. So if I just look at this as it is, the ordering is completely undefined and non-deterministic. Whether that's a problem is up to you. You may be simply getting that string out and then splitting on it in C#, and then you've got your unordered list of names, and you want to do what you want. However, what you can do, and this is stuff we've actively had to work on in EF Core 7 in order for this to work. So you can actually do, let's order by the views. Okay, so we're going to order them by the views and then select out the name. Let's run this and see what happens. So if you look at this, now we get some very weird construct, which I'm sure nobody has ever seen here. And this, like, this is very advanced. I didn't know this before I started working on this. SQL Server allows you to do this, to define the ordering like this. So here you have the actual aggregate expression. It's very weird. And once you close the parentheses of the aggregate functions, you have the option of saying within group. And inside you put the order by, and you say which thing you're going to order by. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. It's SQL Server syntax, but it does work. Now notice how this order by gets translated in a completely different way because it's applied to a grouping, right? So if you put an order by at the top level or anywhere else, it's going to get translated completely differently, right? And it's kind of crazy, right? It's the same operator, and we've translated to SQL in a completely different way based on the context in which it is, right? It's kind of interesting, I think. But that's not the only operator, right? Like that was just group by. What about other things that we can put here, right? So I'm gonna just show another one. There's also distinct, but let's skip distinct for now. I'm also gonna filter by all the blogs whose views are more than 2. So I'm gonna add a predicate as well. Now here, SQL Server is a bit less nice. So there's no specific syntax like you've seen for order by to do a where clause. So what you're gonna see is what can arguably be termed to be a hack. So what we've done is this. If you look inside the string ag, inside the parentheses, so this is starting to get pretty complicated, right? The SQL, you cannot parse it anymore like on a first go. So just concentrate on let's see where it ends, on this bit, okay? This is basically this bit, let's say, yeah. So this is, instead of just having the B name, which is what we had before, or rather the coalesce over the B name, doesn't really matter. What we now have is a case when. So case when is basically like a switch statement, or a switch expression rather, in SQL. And what we do is we say when the views are larger than 2, then the result would be coalesce name to empty string. Otherwise, it's going to be nothing. So the otherwise here is implicit. When you have a case when and you don't have a default, like an else thing, then it's gonna default to null. So basically, this thing is gonna return the coalesce name as long as the views are larger than 2. If the views are not bigger than 2, then it's gonna return null. And what did we say 2 minutes ago? We said that most aggregate functions filter out nulls. So it's basically a way to hack, to use the case when construct to inject nulls instead of the actual names, and then have that aggregate function filter them out, which is an interesting kind of hack. There is one problem with this hack in one specific context. If we ever have an aggregate function here which does not filter nulls out, okay, then this would no longer be valid. Then it would produce incorrect results, right? Because what we're doing is we're implementing the filter by converting these values to null, but that would no longer be valid. Now, SQL Server happens to not have a function like this, so we don't have to deal with it. But Postgres does, for example. We do have functions that that treat null in a special way. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to jump over to the other side, to the bright side of the universe, as I see it, and we're going to switch to Postgres and take a look at how things look there. So in order to do this, I'm going to do something very easy. This is just my CS proj. I'm going to go to my CS proj here, and I'm going to comment out SQL Server and put in Postgres. And inside, back in my program CS, I'm going to comment out use SQL Server, which is now red, and now we're in use NPG SQL. I want everybody to take another look at how this looks like. This is the SQL Server expression, okay, with the case when, with the within group, and you're going to see the same thing happening in Postgres. So I'm going to run this now. Hopefully everything is just running. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so now there's no more square brackets. Now there's double quotes, like I like them. We're now in the Postgres world, which is a little bit different. You're seeing the same coalesce and coalesce. The function is called string ag. It's in lowercase. It has an underscore. Things are fairly similar, but slightly different. Now, the ordering is now expressed via an order by clause inside the parentheses of the string ag. So it's a different syntax. It's cool. I think it's nice. I think it's a bit nicer, but it doesn't matter. It's just a different syntax. It's a matter of taste. What is much better, though, is that here, after the parentheses, we now have this weird filter thing, which is completely different. And inside the parentheses after that, we have just a normal where clause. So that's basically like a normal where clause. We don't have, basically what I'm trying to say is we don't have to hack around like we did in SQL Server by using a case when to convert things to null. We have a first class construct in Postgres for applying a filter. to a grouping like this before things go inside it. Now, I hope everybody understands that this filter here is very, very different from what would happen if I put a where at the top level. The where happens at a different level in the query evaluation, right? The query is different, right? And this construct, I had never heard of it before I started working on aggregate functions like a few months ago.
So is that part of the SQL standard that
I don't think so.
Implements, or it's just a custom?
I have no idea. I don't know. I'm not aware of this in any other database. SQLite doesn't support this at all. By the way, SQLite does have a string ag function, just like Postgres, but you have no way of specifying the ordering, which is kind of dumb. I mean, usually if you want to concatenate those strings together, you want to control the order. In SQLite, you don't have something like this. So every database does its thing in this place.
So by the way, when I was going and asking, what the advantage of doing it on, doing that original simple one. So Smith put in the comments, if you apply filter based on grouping, then the aggregate function helps. So So we're doing the filtering stuff, right? So.
Right. You can continue. Exactly. Yeah. That's a good point. That's one other reason why this is good, because you can translate this to the database and tell them. That's a very good point. Okay. So now we're in the Postgres world. So I wanna show off with some other things, like some quick things. So string join is nice. And when you get it, you get back that string back at the client. At that point, you have to do something with it. You're going to typically split it, right, by the comma, and have to deal with all the, the splitting and escaping and all that kind of stuff. Postgres has a first-class concept.
Just a time check. We're getting close to the top of the hour, and Jeremy and I do have to leave, and there's a few questions that we should go through. So
okay, when do you wanna
just
finish?
Get to a good stopping point. I don't know how much more you've got prepared. Probably like another 2 hours worth.
Yeah,
I just want to know the answer to the riddle. That's the only thing. I need.
Okay. Yeah, I can't leave people in suspense here. So I'm gonna jump here. I'm gonna show one quick thing here with. Okay, so I'm gonna jump over most of what I did. What I am gonna show is one function in Postgres which kind of replaces this. I'm gonna copy this across. I promise I'm going to be super quick about this. So instead of doing string join here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Postgres specific thing called array ag. So that's an aggregate function that basically returns a single array out of the values. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to paste the exact same expression that we had. That same expression here. So what I'm doing is exactly the same thing as I did with the string join, except that what I am doing here is getting, let's see, an array aggregation out of it. So cooking now has a string. If we want, we can actually let's do a quick string join. We're going to convert it the other way. We're going to now do a string join on them on the client side. It's kind of funny, right? So now we downloaded the array directly from Postgres. It's very weird, right? And we're going to join it back on the client just for display purposes. So we're back to where we were, except that the joining would now happen on the client side because Postgres is capable of giving us an array, which is very cool.
Postgres has native support for array types, which is not common in databases.
Now, I'm not going to go into this, but this could be the basis of a really cool loading strategy for dependence, which avoids the confusion, explosion problem, and all that. But I was planning to talk just a little bit about this, but I won't. Now the thing is, okay, so for our riddle, that's also relevant for something else that I wanted to show you guys. The way we would kind of recommend doing this, so people might have figured it out. I've already given some clues, right? So we've had this query for a while, and this query groups by the category, and it gives you multiple aggregate values, right? That was the whole point of this. The riddle was exactly that. So the hack that I'm going to show you guys, I'm just going to comment all this stuff out, and we're going to do the same thing, except that instead of grouping by the department, we're going to group by some constant. It doesn't really matter.
So is this the solution to the riddle?
It is the solution to the riddle.
Oh, do you want? Shall I show what people have?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Oh,
okay,
yeah, of course. I didn't know you wanted to.
So this was I think.
Yeah, that's it. That's basically
it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So basically, kudos to Mizard X. Very cool. The answer, it doesn't matter by which constant you obviously you group by. You basically just use a group by a constant, which means that your entire table becomes a single group, right? That's the whole point, right? every single row returns the same key for the grouping, then all the rows are in one single group. And at that point, you can just do your thing. You can do a select just like you would do on a real group by, which you've seen me do like already several times. So if I do this, I use the true, but you can just as well use 1. So if we do this, then you see a SQL which is maybe not the most, it doesn't look like the absolute best, but what you have is max and count. So you get these two things. There is one alternative that you can look at if you really want to. I also did it this way, which is conceptually maybe a little bit uglier, but it's like games with links. So what I did is I did CTX blogs, and I select for each blog, and then I kind of discard the blog, and I just project out the new anonymous object, and then I ask for only the first one, and this gives out this SQL, which is basically the same thing. So this is just fun and games, right? So I get this kind of thing, which is maybe slightly tighter, but it works, right? So anyway,
good stuff. Okay, so let's look at some questions that people have posted.
Sure thing.
Let me see, going through here. Let me go to, sorry, let's go to my stars one, that's easier. Coming back to those, just seeing if there's anything about, sorry, I should be more organized here. Oh, we've already shown that was the answer. Okay, so the answer, the population standard deviation means you have all values, and sample means you don't. And Smith also said that in the chat, so he would have been our source of that information on the EF team. So a couple of questions about the complexity of translating these on each database engine, and kind of related to that, does each provider have to do all of these? How can they be supported? That's
so I would say the bulk of the complexity was to make this work in the query pipeline in general. So the concepts behind this thing are difficult. That's what Smith was working on. Actually making these work on a specific database provider is not that difficult. That's the whole point of EF Core, right? The infrastructure and the hard lifting is done by the relational engine that Smith does. And then specific database. So I do the Postgres provider. What I had to do is plug in those, those things which you saw, like the filter and the order by, those things which are specific to my provider, I had to plug in. Of course, I also needed to do all of the, each translation I need to do myself because it's provider specific. So you do translation by translation, but adding a translation in general is one of the easier things that you have to do as a provider, right? It's not a big deal. It's slightly more difficult for Aggregate because it's conceptually more complicated than just a normal thing, but it's no big deal.
So what happens if a specific provider doesn't support something that's in EF functions?
So those things that you saw in EF functions are extension methods, which typically will come from your provider. So for example, the array ag that you saw, which is a very Postgres specific thing, it doesn't come with EF Core. It comes with the Postgres provider.
Standard deviation and things like that we say, oh, everybody supports that. So the idea is there that we do a bunch of research to kind of try and make sure of that, but it's possible that your database doesn't have standard deviation, right?
So I mean, standard deviation specifically is actually, even though it does exist in all databases, it's actually defined for each database in EF functions for each database, because there's some slight differences there. If I remember correctly, I don't remember the exact reason anymore, but in the kind of types that are supported. For example, one database supports only doubles, and the other one supports also decimals. There's some discrepancy in, the function, the concept is there in all databases, but the details of which types it's going to actually work on are not. So
But in general, though, regardless of whether we're talking about mapping functions or any other thing, there are some databases that won't support everything that can be done in every other database, and that's fine. We never try and make it seem like EF is the same just by switching the provider. I know in this case, Shay switched the provider and it worked, but you have to test because databases have different capabilities.
Absolutely.
Some query shapes are not supported in SQLite, for example, and it will throw an exception basically because we can't translate them. Will we use a different function in SQL prior to 2016? No, we've only done it for the modern translation.
Exactly. So we can. I mean, I'm not aware of any like efficient
trade-off of
way.
value, right? Like how much time do we spend trying to do the older
Also, we don't want to like provide some substandard inefficient translation just so that old versions of SQL Server work, but inefficiently. We'd rather not do that kind of thing.
Yes, indeed. And I don't understand this question, but maybe Shay does. Support group by cube?
I don't know. I don't understand the question. Group by
Okay.
cube.
Maybe
I don't know
Scott
what
will
cube
answer if
is.
he understands. Let's see.
There is another category of aggregate operations called analytical functions, and there's window functions. So here we've only added support for the plain aggregate functions. We don't have window function support, just to be very, very clear.
There's an issue for that. Vote for it if it's something you want us to do. Okay, so just now going right back to the beginning and some of the stuff we're talking about EF7. So Bryce on the team, he's excited about any displaying with full text search on SQLite, where the text columns have to be in a separate FTS table. Yeah, I always forget about that one, but that is a good use for that. And then a question about using stored procedures. So I should point out here that EF from the beginning has allowed you to call a stored procedure in a query. That's not anything new. Version 1 of EF Core allowed that. We still allow that. We didn't need to do any work. When we talk about stored procedure mapping in EF7, what we're talking about is instead of doing an insert, update, or delete command when you save changes, we now call a stored procedure to do one of those things. Querying from stored procedures, it's always been there, always will be there. No issues with that at all. So I just want to point that out because sometimes people mistakenly think you can't query with stored procedures when we talk about, oh, we're doing stored procedure implementation or whatever. I guess it's to do with data cubes, the group by cubes.
Okay, that explains why I don't know anything about it.
Okay, so I think Jeremy and I have to go off and really show the stuff to the directors that nobody's going to talk about, right? First rule about EF Community Standup is you tell everybody about EF Community Standup, but not about the secret bits.
Good one, Arthur. One last note is, of course, all this aggregate stuff will be documented. I already have documentation like pending for Postgres. We'll document also the translations and for SQL Server. There's a lot of other functions which I didn't show. There's spatial functions as well, which I was kind of excited about. So if you have a lot of polygons in your column, then there's a function that's going to merge them all together or intersect them, and you get like a new geometry.
Yes.
There's lots of cool stuff there.
I'm working on what's new for EF7 to go in our docs. So it's on my list to kind of do an example of the spatial thing, for example. So hopefully we'll put some more examples in there. Yeah, the riddle thing was a really good idea. Maybe we should make this a recurring feature where we pose a problem near the beginning and then we come back to it at the end. That'd be cool.
Yeah, well, I'll keep it in mind.
Anyway, we can't keep the bigwigs waiting any longer. So thanks everybody. And we'll
bye.
See you next time.
Thanks,
Keep
everyone.
it chargeable. Are you